The opinions expressed in the following are those of its participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and the Six Talk Podcast Network. Also, the following contains mature material and mild language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
For Saturday night, October 9th, 2021, presented by Anime North, this is episode 52 of the Anime Roundtable Canada. Good evening from 6 Points, 10 minutes south of the Anime North compound in the Toronto West End. Mike Nicolas, James Austin, Kevin Ng, Mohamed Sharmarke, and Geoff Greig around the table with you this evening. A quick reminder that we want you to have your say as well, so animeroundtable@gmail.com, old school email. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Anime Roundtable, and the archive, animeroundtable.com, for past episodes and show notes. Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Discord. We have a presence. We just haven't marked our territory there yet. This is Thanksgiving Day weekend here in Canada. There's always this discussion as to how come Canada gets to celebrate Thanksgiving a good month and a half before the Americans do. And for reference, while it is a major holiday here in Canada, it is nothing compared to what Thanksgiving is typically like in the States. Retail workers usually do live, for starters.
Well, they eat a lot more in the States. They make a big deal out of that.
Yeah, that too.
And football. And it's like Black Friday Eve, as you were alluding to.
There's usually an over-under on number of retail store worker casualties.
There's that famous, I think, internet famous video of Black Friday in Canada where the Best Buy employees are just clapping as the shoppers walk in single file, and then either before or after they cut to the American Black Friday and people are falling over each other and getting crushed and everything.
I
think that is fairly accurate. Like, I've done, Boxing Day, Black Friday shopping before, years ago, and it can be weird as far as like people waiting at 5 a.m. in their cars for sales or earlier, but I don't think it's ever gotten super violent in Canada, at least not as kind of reliably as it can be in the US.
I think the cold has a lot to do with it. I know from my experience, Boxing Day lineups, everyone has a camaraderie for one another, spending those 5 to 6 hours in the freezing cold together. It's like a mini family. We're not there to screw each other over. We're all there to get the deals,
I hate to tell you, but someone told me a story that's going to put a torpedo in what you guys said.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, someone told me that, I guess it was one of the Toronto EB Games, or I guess as they're now called, GameStops. They were doing the launch, I guess, for Metroid Dread, and they had the amiibos and everything. And supposedly one of them in the western part of Toronto got crushed with people and just was not catching a break. And then one lady got so angry, I guess, because she couldn't get her amiibos or whatever, pushed over, I guess, a display or something like that, crashing things over the floor. And I guess they had to ask police to escort her out. Someone told me, and I'm like, well, that's kind of intense, because I just walked in, bought my copy at my location, and had a normal shopping experience.
Kevin, you have a thought?
Oh, I was just saying how, the stereotype is that we're more civil people. There's also, a lot fewer of us in comparison to our neighbors in the South.
Well, yeah, there's only roughly 10% of us.
Yeah.
In comparison.
But I'm just like, really? You're gonna run over people? Like you're running over people, and it's because of crowd rush, or like threatening to harm someone for whatever door crasher, or it's just like, come on. I know it's not all like that. Not every state's like that. Not every city is like that. But that's just all I think. I just sigh.
I think it took longer for those Black Friday type deals to come to other places, because now it's come to Europe, it's come to Canada, and it was more from the States. And remember, it always used to be Boxing Day. That was the big deals day for
Yeah.
us and for the UK and other places.
Yeah.
And they still do Boxing Day here, of course. Like, I know there are some retailers here that purposely do not do deals on Black Friday. Like, at least some of the clothing boutiques that I patronize, they don't do deals on Black Friday because they're like, well, that's an American thing.
Well, yeah, nothing like waving flag. Well, I get the feeling we will talk a little bit more about this when the American version comes up in about a month and a half, like I said. Okay, before we move on and start to get to the real business of the episode, and you'll find out the business is going everywhere tonight, I'd be remiss because 2 weeks ago we forgot to mention these, but some congratulations are in order. First of all, our old friend Clarissa Jewell. How long ago was this, Geoff? It was some months ago, actually.
It
She had a
was,
daughter.
I think, 6 or 7 weeks.
Yeah. Daughter, right?
Yes.
She had a daughter.
Oh,
Congratulations to them. I know that she did express some difficulties, but everybody seems to be doing well. I know, Geoff, you've met her.
That's right.
What's the impression?
That's a cute baby.
Yeah, it's just a baby. But it's great to hear.
It's an attractive and cute baby. There are
Hey,
some that don't do so well, but
Jeff,
Yeah, that's you.
Jeff, in your opinion, is this baby the chosen one?
it's hard to say at this age. There's certainly some evidence to that theory, but we'll have to wait and see.
So we're talking like Amuro levels, Kiriyamato levels. Like, what are we talking here?
God.
Oh, for God's sakes. Oh, well, you are free to answer the question, Mr. Greig.
Well, I will say that I didn't see a spirit of fire lift the baby up as it spoke in the voice of its ancestral form. It was fairly quiet when I saw it. I mean, that sort of thing generally happens at birth, so I wouldn't be there to see that. But so far, so peaceful.
The other congratulations this week belongs to James's sister-in-law and brother in the same breath, I guess. You're an uncle again, aren't you, James?
Correct.
A boy, I heard.
Yep. The Austins are known for producing males.
Yeah, and make life hard for their mothers at the beginning, from what I heard as well.
Well, there was a fight between the Chows and the Austins, and the Austins won out because they have daughters on their side. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I think they've also mentioned that Austin boys have a habit of coming out just a little past the due date.
Yeah, that's normal. That's a normal thing for us. We just like to stay close to home, as they say, right?
How long do you guys have a habit of prolonging it?
Well, Matthew was actually on the good side because my mom needed to prolong that because it was like this weird series of events that meant she couldn't have Matthew and stuff like that. And some of it was my older brother broke his arm and stuff like that, and so he had to get a cast off and all this other fun stuff. And for me, I just decided not to come out on time, I guess.
Wait, his arm was broken at birth?
No, I'm talking about my other brother. So, because my older brother had to have the cast off, my mom wanted to make sure everything was good with him before she went in to have my brother.
Very nice of your brother to wait for all that to be settled.
Well, supposedly the doctor on that one said he had never got that excuse that the mother couldn't come in to induce the child and stuff like that because their older child needed their cast off in the same hospital. Because my mom was that big and she was going in, they thought she was coming in that day to get induced. It was the day after.
Oh boy. Well done. Well, how are they? How are they holding up?
I
How's
think
your?
they're doing quite well.
Mm-hmm.
They're learning. They're learning the ropes.
I'm sure Cheryl's doing fine. Matthew, I'm wondering about.
No, he's doing fine from what I hear and stuff like that. And the apple of his eye, as they say, for the new baby. And as we were looking at it, he's like a little football in my brother's hands, and I got to hold him too. So,
Well, that's one way to put it.
Have you spiked it yet?
Touchdown, Bears!
Oh my goodness.
well, since we're never good at sports, I don't think we'd be spiking babies.
Okay. Well, where do we get started tonight?
Well, I heard most podcasts for anime might start with the fall season, right?
Well,
That's
yeah,
what
we
they
are
all talk.
there. Okay, let's acknowledge it. I have not looked yet. I know you have been, James, and on that note, also on that same breath, New York Comic Con has been going on over the weekend, so I guess we'll have a couple things to mention there. I have not kept up. I know you guys have. What caught your attention?
Well, fall season's always a big season, right? But some interesting ones, like there are some sequels, like the sequel that I'm definitely watching is Restaurant to Another World Season 2, which is basically just food porn and stuff like that. It's like all these people from another world coming to our world to enjoy our delicious food, and it's just great to watch. It's based off a light novel, which Seven Seas released, which I enjoyed quite a bit.
So
Did the art
less
Another
did
one.
the sorry
wars.
did the art style for that change
So
for
yes, the
restaurant?
studio did change from
Mm.
Silverlink to I think it was OLM or something like that. I can't remember which studio is doing, but you can see a bit of difference, but it still basically looks the same. The style is basically still there,
Oh,
the
okay.
same as what it was from what I could tell. They have the classic songs, they have some new songs in there, but it's still, and yes, I double checked the studio. It's OLM is the one doing it this season, but it still hasn't changed that drastically. So even if you were a fan of the other, I still think you enjoy this quite a bit.
Yeah, I
And
think
it's
that the I think that that series is kind of slept on. It's a really fun interpretation of the sort of isekai genre. Like, it's not really anyone trapped anywhere necessarily, but there's a lot of fun interplay between our sort of Earth contemporary food and the type of food that these fantasy creatures and peoples are familiar with. It's a really fun premise, and they get a lot out of it. Like, you'd think, it's kind of a bottle episode, 80% of the time. But it's still a really unique and fun series. It was one of my favorites from a few years ago.
it's like two episodes in one. So the first part's one episode, the second part's another episode, and it's the same thing as it was before. So if you enjoyed the first season, Jeff, then you'll enjoy this as well. And if you haven't checked it out, it might be at the local library, Jeff. All 5 volumes of the light novel have been translated by Seven Seas are out now, and that's a fun one to read because it's the same sort of thing. Like the stories aren't that long, so you could read a few stories like after you get back from work and just enjoy something, you know what I mean? Put a smile on your face after a long day at work. But there is some other ones. Another one that was interesting in this one, so Restaurant to Another World Season 2, that is streaming on Crunchyroll again, just to be sure. And then the next one, this one was on Funimation. It's Arena the Vampire Cosmonaut, and Ali Project is doing the opening.
Good
And
old
this one
Alley.
is kind of weird because it's like fake Soviet Union, fake US with different names, but some of the dates for how their space race happened are kind of similar to ours, and they've kind of gotten just after they've launched the dog into space and it getting there for the quote unquote fake USSR, and then they're trying to kind of beat the fake US, and so they want to get a human up there, but they want to make sure they get it right and that they have them on camera. So supposedly, quote unquote, I guess vampires are real. So they're going to try and send a vampire up because if a vampire dies, there won't be any consequences.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And so the first episode is them introducing us to these two characters that are inspired by the first journeys into space, and them wanting to go there, and I guess them getting together in the Star City of fake USSR, and I guess we'll see where they go from there. It's like, will it end with conspiracy nuts being at their door like 50 years later because supposedly no one really did go to the moon? I don't know.
Okay.
But that one I think is an anime original, and it's intriguing, so we'll have to see how that goes. And then there are some other ones I know. I know some people. I checked out Platinum End, which I know everyone was talking about, from the creators of Death Note. And that first episode, I've never read the manga, and I know it's complete and all that, but that was a trip of a first episode with a guy that basically has shit life, and then it's like, okay, I'm just gonna jump off a roof. Angel rescues him and then gives him these powers, and he finds out that the foster parents, like his uncle and aunt, have not told him the full truth, that they actually probably killed his, it was either his sister and his parents or his little brother and parents. And then it goes on from there. It's kind of messed up, but I'm not sure where it's going to go. Supposedly, these angels, I guess, have selected these certain people that are, I guess, competing to be God or something like that. I'm not sure if Kevin's read the manga or anything like that.
I have not read the manga. I hear some divisive opinions on Platinum End, although usually that duo does create manga with divisive topics and themes, so not very surprising.
It feels like I was waiting for that pin to drop, right? Where it's like, okay, when's the light Yagami moment going to happen? When does it go to Kenkaku or whatever?
When is the female doormat character going to show up? Like, sad.
But there was actually, it was so that one was on Crunchyroll and Funimation. There were two other ones I'll just mention quickly. One was more slice of life one, and it's on Funimation. It's called Taisho Otome Fairy Tale, and this one actually takes place in the Taisho era. It's based off a manga that had 5 volumes in Shueisha, and it's interesting. It's like going back into the past, and basically it's this rich son that unfortunately had the bad luck that he got into a car accident with his mom. His mom died, and then he was saved, but his dominant arm doesn't work anymore. So his dad basically says, "You're useless to me," and throws him off onto a mountain villa in Chiba in 1921. And basically he is just feeling bad for himself. And so his father also says, well, I got to do something for you. So he basically buys this girl for 10,000 yen to be his wife. And she goes there to live with him. And she's the bubbly, perfect wife and stuff like that. And there actually is a very good dynamic to them, even though everything I just said sounds absolutely terrible.
Sounds odd. It does sound odd.
I know. It grows, like, I read a bit of the manga too, and they grow together to then want to actually love each other and get married. And then given the time period as well, since I mentioned 1921, you know that it wasn't in that year, it was a few years later. But remember the great Tokyo earthquake and stuff like that,
Right.
plays a
Great
bit
Kanto
a little
earthquake, I
later
think
on
it was.
as a story device.
Interesting. Okay.
But it's interesting, a period drama of that sort, because you look at it in certain things, how they dress, how the way Tokyo and how the way Japan is more rural and stuff like that. It's even kind of like the 50s in that, where they were really not where they are now. And it's like right now you just think of all those big skyscrapers, the buildings, the lights, the neon signs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how much it's changing and stuff like that.
No, that's a story. That's history altogether, though.
So I'm sure even Geoff was, I'm not sure how far Geoff went when he explored around Japan when he was there and stuff like that, but I'm sure somehow if you go and look far enough, you can find those moments in some of the smaller villages and stuff like that, even though, as they've said, they're emptying out into the cities.
There are definitely a lot of places in Japan, especially outside of the sort of tentpole cities, as it were, that do sometimes feel like they're out of time, which is kind of cool. You do see old signs. You do see kind of different stages of modernization, especially in the towns and the sort of smaller cities.
Kind of locked in a time machine.
To some degree, yeah. Or at least like a breach in the time machine, like there was a leak in the time fluid or something that sort of spilled out. So, you get like a kind of rustic, town that maybe looks like it's from the 70s, but there's like a very modern vending machine, or the old-timey ramen place will still have, a ticket thing, which I guess is older technology. But yeah, there's kind of a fun mix that goes on, and a lot of the convenience stores are very modern, but then your kind of general stores or bookstores will not have changed, at least in the smaller towns.
Well, it sounds like an apt description for a lot of Japan in general, though, where old really does have a clash with new, and in many ways coexists with it.
They still use fax machines. That may have changed in the last 5 years, but at least that sort of last check when I was visiting there in 2018 or so, like there were still fax machines around. So people have this vision of Japan as an incredibly forward-thinking, futuristic place, but it is very much kind of a mix of that technology and tradition, like in almost every facet of life there.
Well, we've had this long discussion about it on another front, physical media, still, right? So when you say it in those terms, really, it doesn't shock me. It's just nice to hear the tweak. Nice to hear another angle on basically something that just doesn't surprise me in any form. Well, now that we've kind of brought up the Taisho era, on that topic, and Crunchyroll too, just want to quickly acknowledge some interesting news this week on Crunchyroll concerning another Taisho era title, and it's a really popular one. It's Demon Slayer. Crunchyroll announced what they will be showing in the near future concerning Demon Slayer. First thing is that I think they're going to do a 6-episode series that basically is another retake on the events of the Mugen Train movie before going into the next anime series, from what I heard. But then maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but earlier this week, the Mugen Train movie did appear on Crunchyroll. And for some reason, I'd been led to believe that the movie would be strictly exclusive to Funimation. But I guess there's just an exclusivity period, and I guess that period is now over.
Well, I think the period was over when they both became a part of the Funimation group together.
Yeah,
I think that's an easier thing to do, right? To share some of those Aniplex titles, maybe.
I guess that's a more plausible explanation. Now that you bring it up, I was about to ask if the Funimation Crunchyroll buyout would have something to do with it. You think yes. I'm not totally sure, but I'll buy the argument.
And I think it helps too because it gets the show obviously in front of more eyeballs, as we talked about before. But as we said, I think the bigger thing is if they get that on Netflix and get those future seasons on Netflix after they've done their run on Crunchyroll and on Funimation.
Get the eyeballs from the early adapters, milk that out, and then go quasi-mainstream, right?
And then even that movie, Mike, as we said, they solicited the Blu-ray for that in December, and it was interesting. This one, unlike the holdback period, I think it's same day in December where they're going to have a regular edition from Funimation, and then a special edition, like I guess with all the bells and whistles and the expense from Aniplex.
Hmm.
And interesting enough, that's the only one that has happened to. They haven't done it for Fate or any of their other series, only Demon Slayer,
As
which
in a
is
normal
interesting.
edition?
Yeah, since Aniplex and Funimation have been in the same group, that's the only one where they've done a regular edition through them, which is interesting.
Why wouldn't they do it for Fate? Or are we really talking the mainstream? Are we really talking about popularity here? Fate is popular, but it isn't broad when you compare it to something like Demon Slayer. Or correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it still would have more popularity than some other shows they've done regular editions for in some of their other catalog. So that's where I'm thinking on the lines of.
Okay. That's fair. But I know that's the news that caught my attention from Crunchyroll. And I guess we're all about the mainstream. I admit I have not been keeping up the last couple weeks. It's been Cowboy Bebop. We'll come back to that a bit later on. And it's not necessarily because of the live action. But we will bring up Cowboy Bebop a little later on. And I've been trying to catch up on Kaguya-sama Love is War. I only got through one episode, but it's just been a clusterfuck of the last 14 days for me.
The interesting one as well to check out is Lupin the Third, Part 6. And it's interesting that the first episode is episode 0 that came out on High Dive. I guess we'll have to find friends who have that, but episode 0 is interesting where it's kind of transitioning from part 5. He's still in the blue jacket. Then he's going to go to the green jacket. But the reason why it's so big is that Jigen, the actor for that, he's the last one
That's
of
right.
the original actors, Kiyoshi
He's retired,
Kobayashi.
Right?
His last role is episode 0. And so they made it about him and about Jigen. And then he's retiring, obviously, after that. And then the new actor for Jigen is going to start with the next episode for part 6. So it was quite a send-off, which not all of them got. And it's kind of like the end of an era, so to speak, because they started way, way back, remember, in 71. And this is supposed to celebrate 50 years.
Well, you had me thinking, now that you brought that up, how often do you see like an animated special to celebrate a seiyuu who is retiring? Because when you brought that up, I thought of, I think it was Sumire, the voice actress behind her from Sakura Wars. They had a special for her when she retired, surrounding the character she played. I know somebody listening out there would know of a couple more instances, so give us a right. I'm really curious.
I'm guessing it would be more the long running series and stuff like that from Japan that would have those, because I think this was definitely a special circumstance and like that. And it's kind of like the final change.
Well, yeah, there's that
right?
circumstance. I think in the case of Sakura Wars, at the time that happened, Sakura Wars was the thing in the business, right? And we've had this discussion before. There's a panel on this as well, I think, at Anime North. Or it was Lockdown, pardon me. But I think I'm just curious. I'm just curious what type of circumstances would bring something like that out. Who else? Who mentioned the high dive thing? I know that we got that in our show notes this week. Was it you, James, or was it Mo who made the suggestion to bring up high dive and Lupin?
I mean, I brought it up just to say that they're pumping out new content, right?
Yeah, we had mentioned it before, remember, when they made that license announcement before their actual virtual event and stuff like that, which remember I said that would have been the kicker that you use at the end as your one more thing But for whatever reason, they just had a press release
Well, there you
before the
go.
virtual event.
There's your still kicking moment for High Dive right there.
Well, it'll be interesting with this part 6 because it's happening in England and supposedly based on the premise. Supposedly Sherlock Holmes' longtime partner Watson is dead, and who do you think they're going to blame? Lupin.
Oh, great.
So that'll be interesting to see how that goes, and who knows, maybe he'll swipe the crown jewels or maybe one of the Queen's corgis.
Well, it would have been back then. The Queen now doesn't have any more corgis. They all died.
That we know of.
One of them could have been a data dog. You never know, Mike.
That makes them even more valuable. Okay. Well, since we brought up older titles, we're just, I think this is how the episode's just going to go. We're just going to try and flow one theme into another with each of the stories, right? Dirty Pair. A Kickstarter for a dub of Dirty Pair. What's the story behind this one? Like, does anybody know? Or James, you know about this one.
They definitely teased it. I know Right Stuf Nozomi teased this, and they kind of got the ball rolling just like they did with Emma and Arya in that they put it on some streaming services the day the Kickstarter launched on the Friday. So that was Retro Crush and Crunchyroll. And a lot of it is centering around, if you read the Kickstarter, the first series of 26 episodes had never had a dub, so they're going to dub that. And a lot of people, because that was done in the 80s, they weren't sure they had the M&Es, the music and effects for that one to actually allow them to create the dub. But it sounds like they found it, or they're finding a way that they're going to be able to dub this, and they're going to do it in New York with Headline Studios like they did with Emma and Arya. So I think they'll do a great job with that. And I believe as well for that one of the original English voice actors is coming back for that one that worked on the ADV ones for the features, the OVA, and stuff like that. And that was it was Jessica Cavello.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and
There's a
she
name
did,
I haven't heard in years.
yeah, she originally played Yuri, and she's going to come back and stuff like that to play Yuri. Now, some of the other ones obviously might have to be recast and stuff like that, but I'm sure they'll do a great job just like they've done with the other stuff. It's interesting. Like, the goal for that one was 275,000 US. They've already broken that. And different people were talking about how it was higher than their other ones, but they're doing a 2-core series to redub. And they're also doing some different little extras and stuff like that, but they're also doing the Blu-ray for the rest of the series. But to get everything, you have to pay 250 US, so a lot more people are probably paying more to get the full Blu-ray experience of Dirty Pair Season 1 with the new dub, OVAs, features, and then Dirty Pair Flash as well.
Okay. Dirty Pair was a thing. It really was. I mean, it was a benchmark for the really old school fandom back then. I never got into it myself, though. I'll admit that. And I'm pretty sure it's beyond the comprehension of a lot of the more recent fans. But, you know, those of us who are having our midlife crises already, this was the entry point for a lot
as
of
they
them.
said, one of the original ones, Girls with Guns type series and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And they had mentioned that obviously in the Kickstarter too. And it's that thing of, as they said, that their actual codename is Lovely Angels, and they're going out trying to capture all these bad guys and do all these things. But because somehow something always seems to just not go quite right, they're known as the Dirty Pair and stuff like that, even though they hate that codename. And of course, this was based off a few novels. And actually, I think those novels, I have them myself. I'm not sure if they're still in print, but Dark Horse released them. I think they were 2 or 3 novels.
Well, there you go. At least, you know, there's a market. Enough of a market. At least they're they've exceeded their Kickstarter. There's something going on there.
And I think originally there was an actual American comic based on Dirty Pair, actually released in the US and stuff like that. I can't remember if that was Dark Horse or who released that. And I forget who the American comic creator was for that. I should remember because
The name Adam Warren sticks in my head when you say that.
Adam Warren, yes, Adam Warren, I think. Yep, Adam Warren was the one who drew that. But supposedly that drew a lot of people in, so I'm sure they can get it from there as well, which is an interesting cross platform type thing. Remember how we've talked about both the West and the East influencing each other, right? And that series is one of the ones that kind of had that back in the day, and you never really thought about it.
That's actually a fair statement. Dirty Pair. Back to the future in many ways.
And it'll be going, I guess, till the end of the month, they said, for the Kickstarter. So there's still time to give money to that if you care for it. It's October 31st at 11 a.m. They said it ends.
Yeah, well, we're about a third of the way through the month. After all, that's when Thanksgiving is up here in Canada. So, shall we keep going through our little travel here? I guess our bullet travels for the episode.
Are we talking about the bullets by a certain famous fictional James Bond assassin Japanese bad boy whose creator unfortunately passed away? Is that where
okay,
we're
let's go there since we're on the topic
boy.
of old school here.
Not just a bad boy, he's it's like as if God was a Japanese assassin.
Well,
and all the ladies love him and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting. So yeah, we're speaking. There were a number of passings, and I guess the one that was big recently was, of course, Takeo Saito, who passed away on September 24th from cancer, and he was 84. And there was a lot of outpouring for that, but I think he had said as well that unlike when we talked about Berserk, he said Gogol 13 can continue on forever, and the way they set it up, it can keep on going. It's like the most I think it has a Guinness record, right, for the most manga or comic chapters, or one of the longest running in the world.
Yeah, I believe it was the longest running.
It tied with Kochi Kame, according to Anime News Network, both with 200 volumes as of April 5th. Gogol 13 has surpassed the record for a number of volumes, 201, July 5th, 202, September 6th.
Yeah.
And Kochi Kame is a big one, too.
Not even death stops Takao Saito from...
Yeah, he said he wanted it to continue without him. And it literally, the Saito production group is why, so he's obviously trained enough people, and they're able to just pump those out, and we saw just a small fraction of that when Viz released the 13 volumes greatest hits. And the manga is interesting because they have the original stories, kind of like we saw in the anime versions and stuff like that, but then they brought in real world people and stuff like that, and they saw a bit of that in the Viz manga. Like, I think one of the ones they had was when Nelson Mandela basically asked Gogol 13 to help him out. And he's like, oh yeah, my good friend Gogol 13, who was with me in prison. And you're just thinking to yourself, holy shit, what the fuck's going on? And you had other real life people like that, those type of stories. And you probably would think the same thing. It's like, what the fuck are you doing, man? What's Saito doing? It's like, no one went after him, so.
He's doing magical things. That's what he's doing.
Well,
doing God's work.
It's kind of like even like, if you want to check out some of the stuff, it's like, I know on High Dive they have it, but they released it on Blu-ray, and that the Gogol 13 TV series that was about a decade and a half ago, and it's still in print. But those 50 episodes are just a great original stories, and they did have some from the manga. Like the second episode was the famous one, which is so great. It's about Gogol 13 goes to make the kill, but this cat basically dropped a pot or whatever down so that someone could hear the sound of like him taking the shot or whatever. So the police in San Francisco go there, but they can't definitively prove that it was him because it was such a ridiculous shot. And so they had to let him go. But as Gogo 13 is leaving that episode, he just looks at that cat like, I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. And then you had like the movie that everyone remembers for the early CG in the 80s, The Professional.
Professional.
And
I mean,
yeah,
I
it
remember
had,
watching the dub of that, and there were a few rather spectacular deaths in that. I know.
yeah, you
I know
had
Jesse
the
liked to
villain
put that.
Snake, which I think had reference to Metal Gear as well in there.
Hmm.
And then you had Queen Bee, which was released by Urban Vision. It's out of print, unfortunately. The Professional Golgo 13 is still in print from Discotech. But Queen Bee, hopefully someone will rescue. That one's a fun one from Urban Vision from the early 2000s. And that one was weird because it was kind of like political thriller and stuff like that. But the president of the U.S. for that one was a Democratic president, they said, but he kind of acted like a scummy Republican.
Think about the context. Rather timely, actually.
That'll be interesting to see, right? To see how
See how
it goes on, because there are a lot of people that I guess are going to keep his memory alive and keep the great work that he started, right? So
right. It's well, obviously we just made the comparison with Berserk. This isn't really the same thing, though. I mean, I'd like to think Saito understood his time was coming. He was 84. He had cancer. He did have an ongoing illness. So I think he knew he could start to plan those things out. Kentaro Miura, by all accounts, that was a rather sudden death.
I guess more on what I was trying to say on that wasn't in that effect. I guess it's more the thing of usually it stops at that point, but it's almost kind of like Golgo 13 became more like a syndicated American comic strip you see in the newspapers. It became such a part of the Japanese landscape, media landscape, that they could just keep on continuing on and stuff like that. And he did want that, which is kind of rare to see sometimes, right? So
No, it is. And, well, I mean, there's a bunch of little tweaks and angles we can take on this story. I mean, Berserk was a benchmark in terms of the effect it had on the West, in terms of its fandom outside of Japan. Golgo 13, it had its fandoms outside, but I don't think it had that type of impact. I liked it personally, like whatever I could watch, but it just doesn't come across to me as having that same type of oomph for people outside of Japan.
I guess it was because, like, I think, and Saito explained it too. It's like because some people want to think it's like the Japanese James Bond, right? But it's kind of like it would be the Japanese James Bond if you had that samurai spirit kind of infused in him, so to speak, right? Has a different gravitas about him,
Yeah, but
and he rarely speaks. So
Togo was like, yeah, he was just. I'm not totally sure chivalry was a thing with him. He was just a pragmatic character. Give him the money, he'll do it. And he'll turn on you for the right price. But yeah, it's needless to say, it's been a rough year for Golgo 13. Saito's the latest, but as many know, a few months ago, Sonny Chiba, who played Golgo 13 in said live-action movies, he passed away too of COVID. As I said, not the easiest year thus far for Golgo 13 and the fandom and the universe. We're in the final third of it, but nonetheless. Do we want to talk about any of the other recent obituaries?
I think the one we would talk about would have to be Eiichi Yamamoto.
That's the one you
And
want.
remember, we had talked, Mike, because I had watched the recent films from Mushi Productions that he helped Osamu Tezuka produce and direct and stuff like that. And that was 1001 Nights.
Cleopatra.
And then Cleopatra. And then I talked about Belladonna's Sadness. I think Belladonna's Sadness is the one a lot of people were remembering. And that's because, as I said before when I talked to you, the other ones, like, interesting looks at anime, interesting first forays. Like, he obviously worked on some of the other Tezuka stuff that was more children friendly and stuff like that. But these were the first forays into more mature subject matter and stuff like that. So it was interesting how they went at it. But Belladonna's Sadness was interesting because, as I told you before, Mike, like, they really went at it at this source material that if you put it in front of someone and didn't tell them its origins, I don't think they would have told you it came out of Japan and stuff like that. And they probably wouldn't even be able to say that it was made like back in the early 70s and stuff like that, because it's a very striking film, very hard film to watch, as I said, because it's very mature themes and it challenges the audience, and you don't get that much. And it was interesting looking at the interviews, because they did some recent interviews with him last decade on that, and he was very candid about that time in his career and stuff like that, and being an animator and how it was done back then and how they learned it themselves. So it was interesting. The Marquis probably left those first pioneers before we got to where we were, right? And to train the next generation. And now that generation is talking about how do we train the next generation right now, because they're talking about that issue again, right?
Well, there's a lot of issues concerning the next generation, though. And we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Belladonna was a trippy movie.
Trippy movie. That's one way. I never saw it, but that's an interesting way to put it. Is there a streaming option for that?
I don't think there is a streaming option for any of those ones. Like, as I told you, Mike, so Discotheque just released last year Cleopatra and 1001 Nights, which you can get. And then Belladonna's Sadness was released by that boutique, DVD production company. Remember that Elijah Wood was a part of and stuff like that? So it, what was it called? Cinelicious Picks is what they're called. But I had to get through Amazon.com. Like, you can't find anywhere in Canada to get that.
Well, you can't find much in Canada these days.
But even at the price I paid, which wasn't as bad as you could think of it as, it was still something to get. Like, they had really good interviews with the creator, of course, Eiji Yamamoto, and it was really a retrospective of his career if you wanted to learn about that. And then it's a hard movie to watch for some people, but it's definitely something that'll challenge you and you'll come away with something to think about. It's not your regular animation movie in general, and I say that animation movie, not anime or whatever you want to call it. Like, it was definitely a feat of animation that I think stands the test of time.
Good legacy, then. Okay. Well, there is one more death, I think, of interest, but Koichi Sugiyama, the composer of Dragon Quest. This is a tough one for any of us to really want to talk about. I know that. I want to acknowledge it just for a few minutes, though. I mean, what do you say about this? The music was great. Not totally sure about the beliefs.
I want to just call you out on not totally sure about the beliefs. He thought that Korean war victims were happy-go-lucky prostitutes, famous racist, sexist, homophobic.
I know.
It's all bad. Like,
And then the
he's
other thing is he wrote to, what was it, Geoff? He wrote to either it was U.S. House of Representatives or Congress.
It was
Remember
in
when
the I
they
think it was
had
in the
said that
Washington
Japan should?
Post. But yeah, this
Yeah.
nice music, but that's about it. I mean, and I get. Thank you for calling me out. Maybe I sugarcoated that, but yeah, I get it.
like it seemed
That was
like
that's some pretty ugly, pretty ugly views to have.
it's kind of like he was very old. I get that aspect of it, but it's kind of remarkable that he managed to hit all the boxes pretty much of being offensive. Like, you don't really get that kind of clean sweep of a hand all that often. Like, usually someone at least thinks that certain minority groups are okay, but he seemed to be all in on the being offensive.
Well, it's
Talking about certain people, right? Like being unproductive to society, and you hear like there's a certain segment of that generation you just are shaking your head, and it's like, what in the world is going on? You know what I mean?
yeah, it's more prominent than people think.
And it can fester in Japan, like especially his he's not unique to some extent. Like, a lot of Japanese politicians will sugarcoat the war crimes, and that's kind of been the way probably since the 50s. um, but he seemed to have, from what I've read, he seemed to go a little bit further than some others, like in studying Japanese art history, which ended up, crossing over with Japanese history. Um, it's interesting, like, the sentiment, behind some of the occupied Koreans. There was an incident where some of the occupied Koreans were honored as Japanese deities, essentially, which could have been seen as like a positive thing, like, oh, the Japanese are honoring these people, but of course, the Koreans didn't want that. Like, they found that incredibly offensive. So, like, I feel like that's an instance of sort of nuance and still bad form on Japan, but that's the usual kind of racism and discrimination, and not really thinking about things that you kind of expect from I guess notable when this happens to notable Japanese people who speak out on this. um, but yeah, he's very curmudgeon-y and doubling down on this, like, don't give these gays money, they don't breed, that's important, which Japan has a falling birth rate. Like, there's nuance, there's very slight nuance there if you squint your eyes and fold the paper and look at it in invisible ink, but still clearly a very, very sad and troubled man in a lot of ways.
Well, like you said, in the original version 1 era of this podcast, I had some discomfort about talking about some of the xenophobia that Japan has within. And that was the better part of 15 years ago. As time has gone and you learn a few more things in life, you start to see some pretty ugly things. And they're still uncomfortable to talk about, but they have to be acknowledged. That's sort
And
of where that's why I want to acknowledge him.
and I,
Kind of.
I I really am happy that Japan is starting to acknowledge this more and more. Like, there are very promising signs. Like, I think I've mentioned this before, but with Japan Sinks, the new version, they address it really, like, it's not a entire series spanning thing, but it's a powerful moment kind of in the maybe middle end of the series, where they outright talk about the Japanese racism of, I don't want to spoil too much, but the fact that the characters, some characters are half Filipino, plays into things, and you have Japanese people saying, well, your kids are a quarter Filipino, so maybe that's okay. And like, it's just really addressing it. And it's happened in other spaces in the manga anime world. But yeah, it's it's difficult, and I think that the nuances of culture, it speaks to, I know with both Mike and Kevin, like the Kenshin and Act Age situation, it can be so difficult when beautiful art is tainted by the creator.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard to deal with, and like how do you separate it? Can you separate it? When should you separate it? It's I don't think there's in a lot of instances, I don't think there's easy answers, at least from you look at it for far enough back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting as we're thinking about that, Mike and Geoff. It's like looking at outside Japan and inside Japan, how they remembered. It's like we're having that discussion here outside Japan, but in Japan there wasn't as much of that discussion as you were mentioning, Geoff, that they're starting to come to grips, hopefully, with some of their past. But hopefully one day they can look at that and move forward and stuff like that. But it's still a long road, as we know.
Well, we
As
know a version of it
it's
here.
interesting though that a lot of them are still more looking at in the positive light without realizing you have to look at the whole human being, right? And sometimes that's tough to do. Even on our side, it's hard to do because it's like, how do you do that? Do you go completely negative? Do you also look at the small bright light they might have had? It's never an easy answer.
Japan famously changes very slowly, and I think that part of that is, an age thing. I feel that because Dragon Quest is a sort of older series, that's why you have a lot of the Twitter responses being, completely, praising, focusing on the music, not really addressing the man as much. I feel that if it was, a more, contemporary artist, I do kind of hope that even the Japanese audience would be talking about it more, because it would be younger fans, and the young people of Japan, although there's still, some of that negative, xenophobic, queerphobic, etc. mindsets, it's so much less, thanks to the internet, thanks to changing attitudes. So I'm hoping it's sort of a remnant of just older fans not really knowing about this kind of thing.
Two things. One, James, I start to think about that last chapter in Pure Invention again, right? How fandom has found its way into the right wing. At least, certainly the Western right wing. There's a little bit more nuance, but
At least far right, I think that, yeah.
well, yes, far
I
right.
think there's a difference between, I'm definitely personally more on the left end of things, but I think that there's a difference of lower taxes and, the sort of extreme far right that we've seen in the sort of Trump and the 4chans of the world.
It's just there's a far right in Japan that thinks along similar wavelengths, and it's more they're more prominent than people think. You just saw a well-known composer die, who would have probably been along those same wavelengths. Anecdote. I have an anecdote, and then we'll move on. I think this was a few years ago on the topic of really being topical. Canada had a World Cup match earlier this week against Mexico. That match was stopped for a couple minutes because of some homophobic slurs being rained down by Mexican fans in Mexico City at the Azteca. So we know there's xenophobia and prejudice issues that still exists in soccer. Japan, a few years back, finally accomplished something that they didn't want to accomplish, and that was seeing a game, albeit a domestic league game, forced to be played in an empty stadium. This was, I think, if memory serves me correct, it was the Urara Reds who play in. I think it was in Saitama Stadium. During a home match, their ultra supporters showed a banner in one of their sections that essentially read, "No foreigners allowed here." Caught the attention of Japanese football authorities and ultimately FIFA, and they clamped down. One match, empty stadium ban. An entire game was played, and that gained some headlines at the time. It's a really shameful moment for Japanese soccer. But it started to put some of the prejudice up in the forefront at the time. It's uncomfortable. I get it. As I said, I had trouble wanting to talk about it when the subject came up in past conversations on this show. And they're still uncomfortable now. But they do have to come up once in a while. But that's the type of week it's been in terms of the people related to the industry who were lost. Okay, let's move on just a little bit. Something still business-like, but I'd say a little lighter in comparison. Hey, Japan has a new prime minister.
Isn't that every year, Mike?
Yeah, that seems to be the case. Well, remember,
Oh no,
Abe lasted almost a decade.
And I feel like
in his second role.
Junichiro Koizumi lasted a fair bit
Well,
too.
Koizumi was interesting because he lasted quite a while too. I think he held the post second longest, and then he was overtaken by Abe. So, in the last couple years, I'm trying to remember who's the prime minister just before that. Suga, right? Yoshihide Suga, forced to step down because, well, he just messed up everything, I guess.
It's hard to say what would happen if COVID had not happened to see where he would have been. But yeah, the ball was definitely fumbled on all fronts. I think it was probably on the party front too. And so they're probably looking at we can just change the leader. That's how we've always done it. And they are the natural governing party of Japan, right? So they're in the driver's seat regardless.
Well, it's Japanese politics. The impression I always get about Japanese politics, yes, it's a single party who seems to have had a continuous run. I think I forgot when they didn't have it, but there was a period where it was an opposition party who was in charge. But it's always been the LDP.
Some of their members used to be LDP members, right? So some of them, they just create their own fractions or create their own parties. It's kind of funny sometimes.
The LDP is very factionalized too, and so really it's just a bunch of little civil wars. So the man who emerged as prime minister, Fumio Kishida, who is a former foreign affairs minister, held that post for 5 years, 2012 to 2017. And then he was briefly Minister of Defense. I don't know what the Policy Research Council is, but that's the last role he held before he became prime minister. By all accounts, he is probably a moderate. He beat out somebody who was a little bit more liberal-leaning in comparison. And I think his cabinet will contain a little bit more of the center-right of the party. But that all aside, what came up this week also is his words concerning, well, anime. Mentioned he's a Demon Slayer fan, promised to help boost the income of those who work in the anime industry. That's all he said. But I think he used the phrase, at least translated into English, I will work to raise the income of people involved in the Japanese soft power industry, such as manga, anime, and movies. Mentioned he was as mentioned, a fan of the Demon Slayer franchise. He's read the manga, hasn't seen the TV series, but he's read the manga.
Man's too busy.
Yeah, he is these days. Sort of reminds me of Taro Aso, too.
Oh boy.
Who the long-running finance minister under Abe. He was briefly prime minister himself. Correct me if I'm wrong, was he one of the drivers behind the Cool Japan initiative? It sounded like he could have been, but I'm not totally sure.
All I remember is that he liked Rosen Maiden.
Yeah, I remember Rosenman, and I'm sure there may have been others that helped the Cool Japan movement, but it's hard to say what will be happening going forward, because when they mention, hey, I'm a big fan of whatever and stuff like that, I still wonder, is that them just trying to appeal to the people and stuff like that? And there are other things that are more pressing, right? Especially with COVID and how they come out of it, just like we're wondering the same thing here in Canada and in other countries.
Well, yeah, and then the always puttering along economy in Japan as well. And the low birth rate. We've taught there's a bunch of issues, of course.
I was just thinking, it's like, I think, as we said, 2 prime ministers ago, they tried to put a shock into the Japanese system, and it was probably still on the slow burn side, but I'm not sure how successful they will be, because as we said, it's always
how does he propose
slow, right?
to do this? Yeah, how does he propose to help the industry? That's the thing. I guess that's the first question. Now that he's apparently said this.
Because I know we would make ideas, but then our ideas would be considered outsider and Western and stuff like that. But some of them may actually help them and stuff like that with some of the things, like the falling birth rate and a few of the other things. But they have to come to that realization on their own too, right?
No, it's interesting. Yeah, I guess I'll buy the argument. Well, he's just trying to appeal to a younger crowd.
But as Geoff said too, hopefully the younger generations, once they start to get more power and more rights and stuff like that, hopefully they can take the bull by the horns and maybe get it in a better direction and move the ball even further forward, right?
You hope, but
Talk is cheap.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that's a big part of it here.
We see it happen all the time here.
Sure. And somehow he
I
still
heard
gets
you can have an
reelected.
I heard you can have an election and basically end up with the exact same thing you had before.
Well,
It was worth every penny we paid, right, guys? We
It was
did the
hilarious.
best.
Well, I got paid.
I'll say this. If some of those newer promises actually get fulfilled, then you could argue that it was more worth it than right now. But until then, yes. Your point is well taken, James.
I feel like we won't truly know the worth of the election until we have another one in like 6 months, and then we'll find out.
As I told you, it's a tough thing with politics where people don't want to talk about, but it's something important that affects all of our lives.
It's a necessary evil.
And we've seen it not just in our democracy, but in other democracies, that we need people engaged, but they don't want to be engaged because we have these politicians that are just at each other's throats and doing theatrics, and people are just tuning out because they don't want that. It's like they're not listening to everyone, stuff like that. They need to work together, and I'm not sure how you make that happen.
Yeah, they need the mayor to smoke crack before they finally find it entertaining enough to pay attention to.
Oh boy. Well, we're some years past that, I'm afraid.
But
Or
as they say, one day at a time, right? And if each of us take a small step and do a little something, hopefully we'll make some and affect change, even though, as I always say, it takes time, right? And that's the thing a lot of people don't like,
I,
that these things take generations to change and make right.
I mean,
go ahead, Mo.
No, I was just
I have somewhere.
I was just gonna say, fingers crossed that that change will happen before the Eglinton LRT is done.
Oh, for God's
oh,
sake!
it's actually
Yes.
almost done though.
Just so you
Well,
know, Mo, that's
we're
never going
similar.
to happen. They're going to dig all that stuff, and then someone's going to be elected. They're going to fill it back up, and they're going to elect someone
Oh
else. They're going to
boy.
dig it again, and it'll just be a
Oh
nice
no,
little cycle,
Oh
right?
boy. The problem
James,
is
we already
just
I already ranted about Mike Harris like 5 episodes ago.
yeah. We well, I mean, I periodically see the progress going on that, and we're getting somewhere, and it will be done within our lifetime.
Well,
I
we
don't
said that
know.
about the York University subway
See,
line,
that
remember, Mike?
happened.
And that happened
It has
after.
issues, but it
You know
happened
what's going to
after
be?
we went there. Yes, but it
I
happened.
think I think all of this is just a cover up for the underground drill lobby.
Oh yeah, well.
Well, you know what's going to happen? Like, by the time all this shenanigans are done, when we talk about subways here in Greater Toronto area, we'll have flying cars and they'll be useless.
Well, not everyone can afford a flying car, James.
But those
And
billionaires will already be in space, Kevin.
hmm
Hmm.
well,
Yeah, fucking Mike Harris.
now I know. Now I'm lost here. Oh yeah, the Japanese PM. Okay. Still, I do wonder what type of help is coming to the industry. On that note, also, James, you gave me an NPR 9-minute article or podcast of some sort, something to listen to.
So we learned about the difference between sparkling wine and champagne. Is that it?
Yeah, that's what Chris McDonald said in that little piece. Although he started to try and explain some of the popularity of anime and, well, to use your metaphor and Chris's metaphor, it talks about the upcoming schism about to happen with connoisseurs. Right? You can't call it champagne if it's not from Champagne, France. Just sparkling wine. But it still might be good. Kind of say that, so we can sort of say that about anime.
We've talked about that before too.
It's
right?
problematic.
Like I know.
Like, it was interesting because Chris kind of expressed that rather rigid thought. If it has at least one non-Japanese component in it, it ain't anime. But then I think they had a Japanese professor then kind of give the counterpoint, right? Well, it's a little problematic now because of the way production goes. Sometimes it has to be like contracted outside of the country. And it's just the way times have been. We've had these conversations before. The production committees, and then a whole bunch of middlemen, but the actual producers not coming away with much of a cut. But within the NPR piece comes an interesting suggestion about how Netflix and Amazon may not be totally a bad thing, because maybe they're there to cut out the middleman. They're there to cut out the production committees. And maybe there'll be a little bit more of a concentration to eventually give. I know there's going to be a bunch of other issues.
I guess
but it was an interesting 9-minute listen. Sorry.
No, I was just thinking, like, as you said, and we talked about that before, and different people have said different things on Netflix entering in. It's like we know they have the partnership with Studio Wit to train some new animators and artists and stuff like that, which is good. But then the question is, are they going to put the money in to get to those other levels? Some of them said they haven't done enough so far. And then that leads to the question mark, is this going to be another Crunchyroll Funimation where they say, okay, this is how this industry works. This is how much the translators are willing to take. So that's what our standard will be. So are they going to think this is the standard where we can be at, right? Even though they could do better.
Yeah, or you could. Well, when you say Funimation Crunchyroll, when you as you said that, I was thinking Osamu Tezuka, the original Sin.
Which we
Right?
talked about again and again, right?
That's with Matt.
Yeah.
With Mr. Alt there. Well, it's an interesting list, and and if I remember to put up a link to that, because I have yet to put up links for last episode. It's been a busy 2 weeks, but it is a good 9-minute listen. I would at worst call it a summary of a lot of the things we've talked about over the last. Oh, how long has this pandemic been? A year and a half now?
I'm pretty sure it's been 46 months.
Yeah, we're getting there.
But I guess in relation to that champagne versus sparkling wine argument, it was kind of similar. I think, I can't remember who at Funimation had said it when they were talking about the uniqueness of anime and why it was coming up. And they talked about the je ne sais quoi, that the Japaneseness. And that if you take some of that away, it makes it less unique. And I think there was some of that in that too, but they didn't exactly say that in the NPR.
Worth a listen. And just consider it another thing to add to the debate. And always remember that this debate is ongoing. Because fandom changes too. Oh, now I know. Now I know. Now here's my election zinger, Mo. It's just worth noting. I worked an election, so if another one happens, at least I have a chance at a job. Just saying. I got paid for the last election earlier this week. It's good. It's good work if you can get it. Okay. Well, we're as I said, we were just going through just a few of the things that caught our attention this week. We really didn't have too much of a plan for this episode, and there's other stuff we would like to talk about, but we're an hour in, and there's other there are subjects here that would take a very long time, and I know we can get somebody else to talk about this who is a lot more well-versed on it. So when we talk a little bit more about what China is cracking down on in terms of the types of popular culture its youth can consume, trust me, it'll be a long debate. But I do want to get an opinion of someone else as well. So just stay tuned for that in the near future, okay? Although one thing I did want to mention, has anyone seen Squid Game yet?
I mean, I think I've heard of it. Is it like that show that everyone talked about that's pretty popular? That I'm pretty sure every person in the entire world has been obligated to watch at this point?
In the
Pretty
last
much.
2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, over the last month, I guess.
And it is from Korea, so.
Well, it's touched off an interesting little debate as well. James, you sent this along from CBC, and we this is nothing new for us, but it bears mention. Go ahead, James.
No, it's I guess in mention to it, we talked about Netflix, right, Mike, and how it's we're seeing more of those live actions from different places of the world that we normally don't see, whether it's Japan or whether it's South Korea and whether it's China or other places that have a different language, obviously, than us, and that Netflix tries to translate them, I guess, to the best of their ability and stuff like that. And now it's kind of like anime, where people that are of the native language are kind of looking at it and saying, I don't quite agree with that. And so they were talking, even by the end of the episode, the same thing that translators of anime had said, is that this is an art form and we're trying our best to get it and translate it in a way that a person in that native language will hopefully understand and stuff like that. And sometimes it works, sometimes maybe it doesn't work as well as it could.
Yeah, we've
And it
had these
depends on what they
discussions.
put in, right?
Mhm.
Money or the time and stuff like that, because sometimes maybe they're rushed.
I wonder how much of the this is once again a debate we've had too about translating. And it's always about, for me, context as well. And maybe experience. For reference, this is, I think, the first Netflix series to be popular. First non-English Netflix series to gain worldwide popularity, I believe. Someone can correct me on that.
I mean, this is all based on Netflix themselves telling us this, so
You take it with a grain of salt, right?
exactly. Their metrics aren't
But
public.
still,
We don't know.
nonetheless, I can't think of how many other non-English language shows have gained something on Netflix.
I mean, that Money Heist is pretty popular.
Okay, touche. Yeah, but Squid Game is certainly quite the talk right now.
Oh no,
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
I don't
So
think anything has gotten to the point where, non-media focused news agencies are talking about it. Like I've heard people talk about Squid Game just on the radio here in Canada. So it's definitely it's causing ripples or waves.
Mm-hmm. And as I said, when it comes to the translation, it's a. I use the famous Maya Angelou quote when we've had that topic before. It's not what you said they'll remember; it's how you made them feel, or something to that effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, as I said, that's the one for one you're looking for. That's the one
Right.
for one translation I think you're really looking for in the long run.
And that's
I
why you have to
also
be artful.
I also wonder, because a series like this, where it is coming out on streaming, first, and I'm not sure when a physical release may be down the line. But it's interesting because, like, theoretically, because it's all digital, they can make adjustments if it's determined that there was, a mistake or something, really misconstrued. So I wonder if that sort of thing will happen before there is a sort of more permanent release.
Well, that's a fair question. I mean, the streaming is basically no different now than the broadcast version. Remember, we've talked about this before, James, right? An
And I guess
anime may
for
have more footage, unreleased footage from the broadcast, like
Like
when it comes out on home video.
I don't
and
Sorry.
will
imagine
they
I don't imagine the English dub will change, but the subtitles, I feel, there's a possibility. Like, if the people who have created the subtitles really stand by their work, it might stay and the criticism will remain and continue to be discussed maybe. But if, I think there is a possibility for reevaluation if they want to.
I think there is food for thought on that, at least on the Netflix side, because I remember when we or others talked about Evangelion and stuff like that and all the different issues. I think Netflix, it was the Italian version for the dub and the sub. They might have pulled and redid that. But I'm not sure which version it was, if it was both or if it was one and stuff like that. So I don't think it's unheard of, and it'll be interesting to see as we go, as more people they see something like this, and then is it a flash in the pan, or will they continue to explore other things in the queue that are maybe recommended from that might take them from other Korean dramas or maybe Japanese dramas or maybe even anime.
Well, it'll depend, I guess, on how much it matters. How much is it worth their time? I mean, I think that's what it would be in the long run anyway, right? Because if it's just Like, how much can they be bothered? I guess we're talking about it right now because Squid Game is #1 on Netflix. But if it wasn't popular, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If it wasn't popular, people wouldn't be noticing this, at least enough people, to make it a story, to make it worth putting up on CBC. And I'm pretty sure it's caught on some other news outlets. But damn, I should give it a watch.
Wait, you haven't seen it yet?
No, I haven't. I've been kind of busy. I'll tell you about it after we hit the stop button, okay?
I will say the show is pretty front heavy. So like, I think the reason a lot of people are talking about it is because they've seen the first episode and that initial impact of the first episode, left.
Are the deaths worthy of something of a panel at Anime North?
Not really, but like, after watching,
I'm sorry. After watching, yes, go on.
I'm just saying, after watching whatever the stuff people have been watching prior to this, I guess it's different in a way. Maybe, I don't know. It's new to most people. Like, I don't think a lot of people have witnessed death scenes like this before. But to the select few, we have.
Well, welcome to our world, right? I can say that to people who don't usually watch these type of things. Well, an anime fan and a Asian pop culture fan can easily say, "Welcome to our world, folks."
No, but then that makes us seem like the article says, a bit snobbish, right? It's like gatekeeperish in a way, where it's like, we want everyone to enjoy the ultra hyper violent grotesqueness that we all watch.
Okay. You think you thought that was a rather snobby comment?
No. I'm just saying it's no, you're not. That's not. I'm not from an article perspective.
I'm just saying. I welcome this with open arms, right? This is because this is so much fun to watch, and I'd like to see people's reactions. It's kind of like people who read the. It's kind of like people who read the Game of Thrones novels, watching people's reactions after seeing the Red Wedding played out on the HBO series, right?
Oh, exactly, and
because there was a lot of tweets on to that effect at the time. Sorry.
No, I mean, and with Squid Game, we're gonna probably get the same situation where by like Squid Game 7, we're all kind of over it. And
I think there's only going to be one series. The creator said he isn't going to do a sequel. So.
He has no say in that.
That's Mo is more probably on the ball than he thinks.
I don't know.
That's a sad part, right?
You never know. Like I don't know what things are like in Japan, but I know that I think director of the Watchmen sort of sequel said, nope, one season, and I'm sure there will be other Watchmen series, but it won't be a direct sequel. So there could be more set in the same universe, I'm sure. But
on that note, you wonder how George R.R. Martin feels about the Game of Thrones prequel that had a trailer drop not too long ago.
I mean, it looked pretty nice. I mean, can't complain about more Game of Thrones.
I haven't seen Squid Game, but I do think it's interesting that as far as fans of Japanese media, I think a lot of us have are more used to the general genre, like from Battle Royale or something like Danganronpa in the video game realm, or with live action Alice in Borderland. Like it's this kind of thing that takes the Saw or Hunger Games type of approach in a unique way. So I am very curious to sort of see the South Korean sort of viewpoint or perspective on a genre that like I'm at least somewhat familiar with. And it's interesting that for a lot of people around the world, this is their first exposure, because your average Joe isn't going to play Danganronpa, and the algorithm probably didn't give them Alice in Borderland. So it's interesting.
Well, I think of it more in terms of the continuing impact of Korean pop culture too.
Oh yeah, like I don't think that this boom of popularity for this show would happen without the K-pop boom. I think they're
Or
intertwined.
Parasite for that matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So I'll give it a watch. It's just, as I said, I've been a wee little bit on the busy side lately. And I do at least want to finish up the other shows that have been on my queue. Like Kaguya-sama, Love is War, on the topic of something ultra-violent. But, well, just quickly, what's on the queues for everybody else before we go tonight? Mo?
Way of the House Husband just got released, so that's on my
Well,
queue.
more stuff concerning Way of the House Husband. And, what's the name of that companion series?
The live action one?
Yeah.
I think it's called Way of the House Husband as well.
Not quite. And the name keeps escaping me, but because it actually features the voice actor. They're like little shorts, but that's been a little bit popular, and that's what I know. That's come out with some new stuff in the last week or so. But that's what else is on the list. Mo, how's the little project going, by the way?
It's still progressing. Still too early to announce. I'm probably gonna cut like a promo, and hopefully we can add that to the episode somewhere in between. But it was interesting. It's progressing. Editing's a bitch, but I believe everyone knows that.
Yeah, well, I've been through that already, and I can't say I do a real good job of it. So I understand exactly what you're saying. How many people have you talked to before?
Sorry, no. So I've talked to 1, 2, 3, 4 people so far. Kevin's gonna make it 5, and I'm gonna edit it down and release it as like a beginning to a 2-parter kind of situation before like the start and then the end. But yeah, be on the lookout for it. It's gonna drop at some point.
Well, we'll talk more about it when we have a more firm launch date for that. So, well, on that note, on other things to look forward to, let's make one entry in the community calendar just before we go. The Japan Foundation New York continues its ongoing series about academic perspectives in Japanese pop culture. It'll continue October 28th, where they'll talk a little bit about cosplay, discovering a sense of self through fandom. And speakers include Dr. Edmund Huff, Frenchie Lunning. There you go, Dr. Frenchie Lunning. Anybody who keeps up with anime academia probably will recognize that name. Akiko Sugawa Shimada and Diana Tolan. So they'll talk about the subject matter. We're going to put a link to the registration for this in the show notes. We'll have to put a bunch of show notes for at least a couple episodes, but we'll put a link to it here. It will be through registration and shown on YouTube, I believe. But after it happens, as just about every other talk in this Japan Foundation New York series, it'll show up on YouTube again as well. So, James, I know you've seen a couple of these talks. I've seen a couple of these talks. They're worthwhile, to say the least. So they're a big recommendation if you have the time to watch them. Anyway, anyone else want to add something before we go tonight? Because I'm looking at my bingo card. I've blacked out my entire card. So I've said all I want to say for the evening. Was there anything else on the mind for everyone else this evening?
So, James, about those Viz acquisitions today. Pretty eclectic bunch of licenses, actually.
Well, is there one that really stuck out to you?
A couple did. Let me see. There was one. What was that food truck one called again, James? I don't remember off the top of my head.
One sec, I'll have to bring it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, these were from New York Comic Con and stuff like that. So Yen Press and Viz were there. So it's nice to see some of them are coming back slowly but surely. So the one you were talking about was Crazy Food Truck.
Oh yes.
And that one is only 2 volumes so far, so they'll catch up quickly. But yeah, based on the summary alone, that's kind of bonkers.
I also.
See, looking at this cover, it has a Ready Player One vibe to me for some reason. I don't know why.
And Rooster Fighter. This was not. This was This one caught my eye too because that's one mean-looking rooster.
Let's just say that is a cockfight of kaijus. That's for sure,
God,
given
yeah.
based on the summary.
So
They also they confirmed the print release of some of their digital titles that had been coming out lately. So The Elusive Samurai is going to get a print release, and that's by Yusei Matsui, who did Nero, who did Assassination Classroom. Did he do Nero? It was either Nero or Muyo and Roji. I forgot which one of those between the two, but Assassination Classroom was his last big hit. So it seems like it's doing pretty well in Japan too. Like it seems like he just knows how to churn out hits. Like, the man doesn't miss, apparently. Kubo Won't Let Me Be Invisible is another one that Viz recently picked up for the Shonen Jump app because it's a Shonen Jump. I think it's a Jump Plus title, so it's part of their digital magazine, if I'm not mistaken. So that's getting a print, as well as Ghost Reaper Girl, which is the new work by the Rosario to Vampire creator. That one's going to be curious because on the Shonen Jump app, by his request, he wants it to be read left to right.
Wow, okay.
And that's a rare thing to hear.
That's a rare
it makes
thing,
me
and
wonder. It makes me wonder about that. Like if he's doing something like Bladed the Immortal, kind of like how that artist worked with Dark Horse to get certain things right in the different orientation.
I don't think they, because in Japan, here's the thing: in Japan, I recall it being right to left. It's just that for North America, he wants it left to right, and he's also using a pseudonym for this release. He's not using his actual name. So
it's an artist thing, I guess.
Yeah. So of course, Vij obliges that request.
And they should if that's their request. Sounds interesting, and just for that reason.
Yeah, I've read a decent amount of it. It's a fun read. So, and the man likes his action scenes too, because he eventually turned Rosario to Vampire into an action series.
Okay.
Also,
let's see. Is there anything to expect from New York Comic Con? Any more that will be of interest to us as anime and manga fans?
I don't remember if the Kodansha panel happened or not.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll wait to find out a little bit more in the near future, I guess, right?
Because Yen Press did do their panel and they did announce some things. Admittedly, not a lot of it interested me because it was mostly a lot of. Oh, actually, one thing did. One's called Lost Lad London.
Nice with the alliteration.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go through it and then we'll call it a night. So
it's about pretty much about a university student and a Scotland Yard detective finding themselves into this weird mystery that happens in the London Underground.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Just so much out there.
Yeah.
And so little time. Matter of fact, we should get right to it. Now I think about it. That's pretty much it then. that's all we got for tonight. Well, there's still a lot of other stuff to keep up with, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about next time. But once again, a reminder where you can contact us if you have any feedback on what you heard this evening. animeroundtable@gmail.com, at animeroundtable, animeroundtable.com. And don't forget, word of mouth is always good, so tell your friends about this show if you think they'll like it. And tell your friends about this show if you liked it too. Probably more important. And leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, because any reviews will help us in the algorithm and hopefully show us to others who might be able to stumble upon us. Yeah, and Kevin, what type of review are we hoping for?
Good ones.
What, that's it?
Yeah. Well,
nothing else to say?
Well, you know, the usual. It's the usual spiel, you know.
Yeah, 4 or 5 stars.
Like, you know, or any review really. But
or something. Yeah, something that's something constructive, please. I think that's more important. I'm sorry?
Yeah, the higher the better, obviously. Apple Podcasts I know that you can leave reviews there. I don't remember if the others do. I'm sure some of them do. I know Spotify doesn't. Like, I don't know.
Depends on where you get it, I guess.
Yeah.
But in any event, let us know you exist. We typically do episodes every other week. Sometimes we'll go consecutively, but regardless, if you don't want to miss out, hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening or watching this to be notified whenever we do drop something new in the feed. So until next time, thanks for listening. Good night from Toronto, and join us again for another edition of the Anime Roundtable. Well, that wasn't too bad, I think, for something that felt rather rudderless going in.
You know what?
No, we pulled it through.
James, I forgot to mention the World's End Harem anime being delayed till January, even though they have episode 1 ready to go.
Still have time because we're still recording.
There's nothing like a big titty show being delayed by 3 months.
Yo!